Welcome everyone to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960 AM. We're chatting tonight with Sarita Samaroo, a lawyer in Toronto, about the real estate market, the challenges that the real estate market from a legal standpoint is encountering because of COVID-19, and how lawyers and how real estate agents and how buyers and sellers are dealing with it. So Sarita, welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. I appreciate it.
So, Sarita, what's happening in the real estate market from a legal standpoint right now? How are you be able to close transactions with COVID-19?
So what we're doing essentially, Brian, is we're having three modes of meeting with clients. The first one would be we're signing remotely via video conferencing with clients. The other one would be that we're couriering documents to clients. And the third mode would be that of course, not our preference, but if they have to show up in person, that they attend our office with protective gear. So those are the three modes of meeting with clients at the moment. And of course, the first one being the preference of having clients sign via video conference and commissioning documents and witnessing documents via video conference.
How do you sign via video conference? So that they've got something and they're signing it and then sending it to you, but you're watching them sign it, or what?
Exactly. So you're watching them, you are the witness, watching them sign the documentation. And of course, we're verifying their identity remotely as well. So they would send in ahead of time their identification, 2 pieces of ID, and then we would verify that identity along with the signature when they're signing via video conference.
Well, that sounds kind of reasonable. I understand that courts are having hearings in courts by video conference, and certainly everyone's having meetings by video conference, so that it makes sense that you can attest to someone's identity by video conference.
Yes, yeah, and I think that may be the new wave in terms of giving clients options rather than always attending in person to offices. This may be a new way of doing business, so it's not necessarily something that is, a horrible thing. Essentially, it's a good thing, I think, moving forward for businesses and for real estate solicitors. The only thing I would just stress the importance of is that we all try to properly verify clients' identification. I think that's stressing the importance of that, and I know the Law Society is stressing the importance of that and ensuring that we are in fact meeting with the proper clients that claim to be who they are.
But you got the same problem if you're visiting with them physically. You've still got to make sure that they're who they say they are based on passports or driver's licenses or something like that. So isn't that the same thing virtually that it would be in real life?
It is. Yeah, it is. It would be. I just think, solicitors have to be much more cautious because there's probably greater instances to falsify identity via technology versus in person. It makes it much more difficult to do so. So of course our preference is to meet in person, and when we do find out that it is in fact safe to meet with clients again, I think that as solicitors will probably make certain exceptions for video conferencing and not make it the norm, because we still in fact would like to meet with clients. And of course you cannot beat the fact that you're meeting with your solicitor in person and they're explaining legal documentation to you in person, and you can ask any questions in that instant. You can do that via video conferencing, but again, it doesn't have the same effect. So that's one thing I do notice when I meet with clients in person versus virtually. There is still a difference in terms of the rapport that you have with your clients.
That's interesting. I guess I understand that you would have a different rapport where you've got the ability to see body language, etc. But video conference, like we're doing right now, gives you a fair amount of ability to understand what people's facial comments are, and you're able to explain all the intricacies of a contract to them. Are you not? Like, what's the challenge in that?
I just think that the in-person contact, you can essentially go into more detail. And again, if you do have more information at hand at the office, you can present that to the client and be present to present that to the client versus saying, I'll have to email it to you at a later date. Also, clients do have challenges in scanning back documents to you. Not everyone has a printer scanner, which is why our second method, if they do not wish to come to the office in person, is we have to send documents via courier, and then a courier has to come back and pick it up. And the cost to the client is much higher.
Okay, I agree with that. So how come we can't do things like DocuSign or e-signs and things like that?
So DocuSign is typically used with the realtors, and I know in some instances mortgage brokers can use it. However, we're essentially the end of the transaction. We're facilitating the transaction. So the lenders and the Law Society relies on us to ensure that we have those original signatures. If we can't verify those original signatures against their identification, then that proves to be an issue that we're not actually fulfilling our requirements, under the bylaws of the Law Society. So if you're signing by way of DocuSign, that is not your original signature. So there's no way we can verify that against your ID. And so we're responsible for that, and we hold a little bit of a higher standard in terms of what needs to be verified, and solicitors are on the hook for that, especially with the title insurance companies, which is mandatory with any real estate transaction whereby there's a mortgage. So the title insurance companies hold us accountable, as well as the Law Society.
In our world that's gone virtual and by a lot of video through the internet, and people are all working remotely, do you think that that's a criteria and demand that's going to change, or are we going to still demand original signatures, not DocuSigned or e-signed signatures?
I don't see how that could change from the perspective of a real estate lawyer or solicitor, because, as mentioned before, we do need to ensure that we have the person in front of us that is in fact signing and taking on that liability of a mortgage, or in the alternative, selling that property and not committing fraud. And we do have the person in front of us that says they are the person in front of us. So I think that original signatures are still quite important in order to verify ID, unless we have some other mode of identity, that becomes very technologically advanced by way of fingerprint or something like that, where we don't need to verify original signatures, and it can be as simple as a fingerprint, similar to the Apple technology that we have today. I think that could be, the wave of the future, or face identification. That's definitely a strong possibility, but again, we'd have to have real estate programs that would be created, or software surrounding that, to ensure that we can obtain identification in that manner. But until that time, unfortunately, all we have at the moment would be original signatures. So,
well, it does seem to me like the legal system is behind the times. If we can use face recognition or fingerprint recognition or voice recognition for banking and for computers and for passwords and who knows what else, it's about time that, frankly, the banking system, the legal system, and the electoral system grow up.
I agree with you 100%. We're very antiquated in the way that we operate as lawyers, unfortunately. But again, we are the protectors of fraud. So I think that's the way we look at it, is that we shield everyone from, those perpetrators. And the banks have very high expectations of us to ensure that we protect them as lenders. So until that we reach that point and we have that technology available, I think that we'll just have to continue in this manner. But yes, I agree with you that at some point this does need to change. What we have learned is that we can evolve. We have, for our firm in particular, we have been sending purchase funds electronically by way of wire transfer. So we've set that up through our bank, and so we don't necessarily always have to attend in person and create certified checks. So there have been adjustments made. We've had staff that can work remotely, so that is new to the legal world. However, banks are still behind the eight ball. I mean, I must say that I still have to attend major A banks, and A banks being the big banks. I have to attend in person to pay out a mortgage. I still have to stand in line and present myself in front of a teller to pay out someone's mortgage and their debts if I'm, consolidating their debts as part of the condition of my mortgage. So I find that shocking. I mean, there's only been 3 banks that I'm aware of that have been set up where you can actually wire transfer funds directly to them, and their mortgage department will process that mortgage. So that certainly needs to change to make it easier on us lawyers, because I mean, we're not, I wouldn't say, we certainly are not representative of the group of people that are the healthcare workers that put themselves at risk every day. But I can say that I have to go into banks almost weekly and expose myself and make sure that mortgages are paid out and debts are paid out for on behalf of my clients. And
Well, that's fascinating. It's interesting because I've heard that now we're doing court processes either by Zoom or by conference call, and that judges are showing up on time and lawyers are showing up on time, and that you've got a lot less wasted time. And so, maybe we've learned some things from this pandemic and COVID-19 and social distancing, and things are going to become more efficient and productive thereafter. Anyway, we're chatting with Sarita Samaroo, a lawyer, about issues with real estate and real estate law and financing during COVID-19. Stay with us for a couple of seconds. We're going to take a break for messages and we'll be right back. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Sarita Samaroo, a lawyer that specializes in real estate transactions. And we're talking about how legal stuff with real estate and financing has been impacted by COVID-19. So Sarita, we were talking earlier that the real estate market is down, at least in the last 2 weeks of March and then April, by like 80%. Sale prices may not be down that much, but the volume is down. Are people still closing transactions?
people are still closing. So prior to COVID-19, the real estate market was really picking up. And so those deals are still closing. I mean, some of those might have been 30-day closings, 60-day closings, 90-day closings. So they are still closing. Are they delayed? Yes. Are people asking for extensions? Yes. Are people asking actually for lease backs? That's something that's interesting and new. People, I mean, it's sometimes asked for as a request, but it seems to be a more frequent request where people are asking to stay in the home and become tenants of their homes, and they've sold their home. It's not recommended.
Okay, so this is interesting. Let's go through some of these in order. So you're saying people are asking for extension. So this is the vendor or the purchaser that's asking for the extension? The purchaser?
It can come from either end. It may be from the purchaser because they're having trouble with financing, because the guidelines to be qualified are much more stringent for those that are applying for a mortgage. Not everyone is employed any longer, unfortunately. And so people that own homes currently that may have been laid off, looking to refinance, are having trouble getting qualified. So we're having those issues come up, or they may be selling and buying again and purchased prior to COVID-19 and now can't get the financing for their purchase. So we have these issues arising.
So
and
are vendors typically granting extensions?
Yes, they are to some extent, as long as they have some reassurance, they have a mortgage commitment as proof that, the purchaser is in fact qualified and there's some promise to close. People seem to be flexible because, again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, some people would like to stay in their home and not necessarily move during COVID-19. Even if they're now becoming tenants, and let's say they're selling their home and no longer wish to own property, moving into another property in itself is a little bit scary, given the fact that people have to ensure it's properly disinfected, or may have to bring in a special company to come in to disinfect it.
Well, just the hassle of going out and looking for a new home. If I had sold my current home, do I want to go into a whole bunch of other people's homes and tour them? And do I want to have to pack up and unpack and move all my stuff during a time when, there's a pandemic?
Exactly. And that is the issue at hand. So most people are it's a wait and see game, where people are saying, well, maybe we'll just wait till this, the curve flattens essentially, and then we'll move. So we'll become tenants of our own home at the permission of the new owner, and we'll stay there for a period of time. The only thing that I recommend to people is that if you are going to provide that lease back to clients, that you have them sign what we call an N11 form. And that's a form in which, would be filed with the landlord and tenant board, which states that both parties mutually agree to ensure that the tenant moves out by X date. And last thing you want is someone overstaying their stay or their visit. So that's an opportunity for people to ensure they have something by way of mutual agreement. And so we're seeing that. And then the other item is negotiation of purchase price. A lot of people are looking for a last minute abatement in the purchase price to get a reduced price because they feel that there has been a drop in value of property in, in Toronto or surrounding GTA. And so
What are people arguing the drop in property is? Is it 5%, 10%, 20%?
yeah, usually it's like a 5 to 10% drop in price. They're arguing, and they're claiming that the property value was not at what they purchased it at a few months ago, which I think is unfair because, of course, markets, as you know, in real estate markets tend to recover. So I think it's unfair that people are trying to use that as an excuse. There's also people putting in caveats that they reserve the right to pursue litigation at a future date if the property was not properly disinfected and they, for some reason, contracted COVID-19 after they moved in, which I think is ludicrous. So there's a lot of
Hold it. So buyers are demanding that sellers disinfect the property appropriately for COVID-19 before they move in.
Correct.
Oh, really? I haven't heard that before. That's interesting. That takes a whole new level of obligation on the vendor.
Correct. Yes, it is. It is. It's onerous. And again, you'd have to have one of those professional cleaning companies that specializes in that. I know that they're advertising quite heavily now, you see on news channels, but yes, I mean, before the wording was professional cleaning, sometimes people would put in wording if a home wasn't particularly very clean. So now there's wording surrounding it to be free and clear of COVID-19 and disinfected. I mean, which we all can't possibly guarantee. And so it'll be interesting to see what litigation.
You think about in the United States, one of the things that you're probably aware of that's in front of Congress is a blanket indemnity that gets all companies out of that obligation because they're worried that lots of companies will go bankrupt, that the litigation in the United States, which is different than Canada, the litigation will go crazy, and then insurance companies will go bankrupt if they have to start coming in and defending people and paying out based on COVID-19 infections. So, that really, I think, puts a hamper on being a vendor of property. If people are demanding that you attest to its cleanliness and then have to take a legal liability thereafter, and that if someone dies, what's the damage? How do you pay that out?
I think it's difficult to prove that. I mean, the onus of proof would, of course, be on the purchasers. And it would be very difficult to prove that you, in fact, your family or, were in fact the cause of someone contracting COVID-19. And so, again, I really don't see how this could be proved. But again, people are reserving the right. They're writing a letter stating, the following, that fine, if you will not reduce the price for us, then we reserve the right to pursue litigation at a later date based on the premises not being properly disinfected. So
I think that most of the studies I've seen say that on most of the services it only lasts 48 to 72 hours. And so therefore I just say, leave it empty for a couple of days.
Yes. And again, exactly. That's what I would recommend, that, if you do purchase a property, you do wait about 72 hours before you move in any event. Don't rush to move in. Don't grab the keys and walk right through. I mean, give it a little bit of time before you do walk in the property.
So people are demanding extensions. People are demanding price reductions. People are demanding indemnifications for COVID-19 infections. What else is happening in the marketplace?
So closings have changed as well. So prior to COVID-19, lawyers would do a key and money exchange. As I mentioned earlier, we're sending funds by wire transfer to other lawyers versus certified checks. We're trying to avoid as much contact at the banks and standing in line certifying checks, which is what we did previously. We don't have a choice currently when it comes to payout of mortgages. And what we're doing is we're asking the majority of real estate lawyers that are acting for the vendors to leave keys in a lockbox. And we're asking real estate agents to help accommodate that request. prior to that, if you closed your deal, you would come to a solicitor's office to come and pick up your keys. Now, this is not become the normal process. The normal process is to leave keys in a lockbox. So, and then we release a code on closing. So that has changed as well.
Well, the whole process of actually just touring homes that are for sale has changed dramatically as well. People are no longer allowed to be present. You've got to leave the door open, the lights on, the closet doors open. People come in with masks and gloves and aren't allowed to touch anything.
Correct. That's right. And they have to be present with their agent if they do want to do a walkthrough. But there's a lot of virtual showings where a lot of people are buying sight unseen. And it's becoming a lot more difficult for home inspectors to go to the properties and conduct inspections because those parties are not allowing those parties to enter, especially appraisals. Banks have to appraise properties properly before they grant a mortgage. So they need that appraisal. And what's being done is that they're asking the sellers to take photos of the interior of the home or condo unit and then send that directly to the appraiser. So that has been something that has been very new.
I want to come back and talk to you about appraisals and mortgage financing and debt and extensions. But let's take a break for messages and come back more with Sarita Samaroo in just a minute and talk about all those banking financing issues on real estate transactions. Stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Sarita Samaroo, a real estate lawyer. She does a lot of other law as well, but we're talking primarily about real estate tonight. And we've talked a lot about the real estate transaction, but now let's talk about the financing portion of the real estate transaction, if we could. Sarita, appraisals. If appraisals were done prior to, March, or frankly, March 13th, Friday, March 13th, when everything really started to hit with COVID-19, are banks honoring old appraisals at a pre-COVID-19 valuation?
From my understanding, what I've heard from mortgage advisors and brokers, they are not. They'd like the most current appraisal. Typically, that's done a week prior to the closing date. And
a week prior to the closing date?
Yes, typically 2 weeks to a week, usually not sooner.
How do you know if you've got a mortgage if you got to wait till a week prior to get the appraisal?
Yes, and you do run the risk of having a reduced value of your property. So that is very challenging because people may then have to come up with that additional equity to satisfy the payout of the existing mortgage to replace the old mortgage, which may be at a lower amount, because most banks can only give you 80% loan to value ratio. If we're talking generally about A banks, A lenders.
That's a huge risk to a purchaser, not knowing what the appraisal is going to be and what the mortgage is therefore going to be up until a week prior to closing.
Well, this is why there's the change to private lenders and people that are lending out their own personal money, and that's become, something that where people may have to switch. I mean, my discussions with mortgage advisors and mortgage brokers are, wow, the people that are generally A clients that have now become B clients, and the B clients have now become C clients. And what that means is A clients are A lending banks, B lending are the smaller financial institutions that lend out, and C lenders are the private lenders. And so now you might see a lot of people having to switch over, especially with loss of income, job loss, whatever, layoffs, whatever the case may be, self-employed individuals who may not have their sustaining income, they may have to switch to private lenders. And that's unfortunate just because of that they're not showing the income.
So let me ask you a question then. So let's say I've got a job and I make good money prior to COVID-19, and then I get laid off middle of March. And I've already negotiated the mortgage and I've given them the T4 slip or whatever it is they required for my income for the prior year. Do I have an obligation? Does the purchaser have an obligation to tell the bank when they get laid off?
They do. And more than likely that may arise because a lot of times too, I know with some of the banks, not all of the banks, but some of the banks, they may call your employer sometimes 2 days prior to the closing date just to verify that you're in fact employed there and that you are still there full time. So
So let me
Yeah.
ask you a question. If you had a mortgage that was signed and not signed, all set up for a certain amount of money, you had the appraisal pre-COVID-19, call it March, early March, and you had provided the T4 slips and your income for pre-COVID, and then you came to closing post-COVID, and the bank wasn't demanding a new appraisal and wasn't asking for an updated income, but wouldn't ethically you have to tell them, hey, I got laid off?
So if you were approved prior to COVID-19 and everything was already arranged and the mortgage instructions have already been sent to the solicitor, you've already been approved. Essentially, you're good to go. With a B lender, I would say that would be a different story, because a B lender, like I said, has every opportunity to call your employer 2 days prior to closing. And I've seen this. This is one thing I have seen recently on deals. They are canceling deals and giving no reason whatsoever to the mortgagor, being the borrower, as to why they are canceling the deal. I had a deal where the client's mortgage was canceled the day before the closing date with no explanation, no
What do
rhyme
you
or
do then? You've got a contract that you're going to buy. I guess you've got a financing condition, so you don't have to buy because of the financing condition?
no, you still have to continue on with your deal. If your deal is firm, your agreement of purchase and sale is firm, the contract is binding. If you waived the financing condition, then it means that you still have to proceed with your deal.
But if you don't have a mortgage, how do you proceed?
You have to seek out private funds, personal private funds from a private individual. So you have to approach your mortgage broker or advisor and ask them to seek out private lending funds, because private lenders look at the equity in the property. They don't always necessarily look at your income. So if they feel that equity is sufficient in the property, and they appraise it and they're satisfied with their appraisal, then they will proceed with lending funds to you. From what I'm also seeing a lot of since COVID-19 has began is that payments are being deducted up front. Under the Interest Act, that's not typically permitted, but the private lenders are still going ahead and doing this. And, again, we'll see many complaints following COVID-19 about this, because it is illegal to deduct interest up front, but they are doing it. They are taking payments up front if you don't have the ability to pay to make your monthly payments. So it'll be interesting to see what case law will come out surrounding that in relation to the Interest Act, and whether those mortgages will be deemed to be valid mortgages to begin with. But let's just say you do have the ability to pay and make those monthly payments. There'll be interest-only payments. You're never paying down principal. And it's essentially just to hold you over in a holding pattern for about 6 months to a year until you can, in fact, be switched back over to a B lender and A lender. And you can qualify and you're back on your feet again, with a bank. So a lot of people have had to move in that direction just to make their deals work and close their deals.
So let me ask you the advice you're providing. Let's say I'm a purchaser of some real estate, and it's post COVID-19. And to call a spade, some people are saying the real estate market's going to take off, and other people are saying we're going to have a 20 to 50% decline in the real estate market. So people don't know, and we're still waiting to find out. So I'm worried about what values are going to be. I'm worried about what my appraisal is going to be. Maybe I got laid off, maybe I got a furlough, maybe I got a wage reduction, but my income is not as stable as it was in February. How would you be advising people to protect themselves so they don't show up to closing without a mortgage?
I would just say make sure you're approved far in advance. Make sure your mortgage broker or your advisor outlines to you that you're in fact 100% approved, that the broker conditions are satisfied. Again, we may get mortgage instructions sometimes as lawyers. It doesn't mean you're fully 100% approved. From an A bank perspective, like a large major bank, when a lawyer receives mortgage instructions, you're in fact approved, the deal is ready to go. But again, banks do reserve the right at any time to cancel a deal. If something looks off, their underwriters are not satisfied with what they're seeing, income doesn't match up, statements don't match up to what your advisor has presented to them. So just make sure that what we call broker conditions are satisfied, and that in fact you have another option lined up besides the bank option. So if plan A doesn't work out, you do have a plan B lined up, so that in the event your mortgage is pulled underneath you at the last minute, at the 11th hour, you do have a private lender lined up. You do have someone that can finance the deal for you.
You
It
may
may
not
not
be
be
able
the
to, you
better
may not be
option.
able to answer this question, but let me ask you a slightly more complicated one. I'm aware of some people that had mortgages lined up, but they were dependent on separation agreements. And then the whole process with the courts, family law, were slowed down, if not stopped. And so therefore they weren't able to get a separation agreement. And so therefore they had the equity, they had the mortgage, but they weren't able to close because they didn't have the separation agreement finalized. And the separation agreement was a condition for the mortgage.
So when it comes to family law, yes, I mean, you do need a separation agreement in place. There are some banks that make exceptions. What I have seen in my own practice is that if you swear an affidavit with a solicitor that there are no spousal support payments payable, no child support payments payable, sometimes banks will make exceptions because they know that a party has to refinance and they're not still legally separated, but they do need those funds. So as long as the both separating parties swear and attest to the fact that there aren't payments payable, or if there are, they at least swear as to what those payments are. Sometimes the bank will make exceptions. So you may want to talk to your mortgage advisor about that and find out if in fact that will be permitted, that an affidavit is sworn in front of a solicitor. But a lot of times a separation agreement is required. And this is why if parties can facilitate an agreement between their respective family lawyers ahead of time, or opt out of the court process, which you can do, and you can sometimes move into an agreement between the parties and your family lawyers can facilitate that, rather than going through the court process, then that's also an option too. You can also settle outside of the courts and then just file your settlement with the courts. So there are options. And you do want to ensure that that's in place before you get a mortgage. But again, if not, then you have to ask the bank for the exception, about what can be disclosed, because the banks, of course, are looking at your capability to pay. And if you do have spousal support payments payable or child support payable, they're going to be looking at that, and they want to know that information because that's how they look at your debt value ratios, and they make a determination as to your ability to pay. And that's what is most important and crucial to the banks. So ask if there can be an exception made with your mortgage advisor as to swearing, what your payments are, or that you don't make any payments at all between you and your ex-partner.
So the market is soft. Sales, at least from a volume standpoint, are down fairly dramatically so far. Some people think prices are down, as you say, 5 to 10%. Some people think they're going to come down even more. And you're talking about there being a lot of complications in regards to ensuring that you can get the mortgage, ensuring the mortgage is good right up to the day of closing. That you're saying that a lot of people are going to private lenders, et cetera. Is it worth buying now, or should we just, wait until the fall?
My personal view, and myself being a real estate investor, I believe that there are always ebbs and flows in the real estate market, but it always tends to pick up itself. I think the best place to put your money is into real estate at all times. I think it's your safest bet, because while there may be some corrections to the market, fluctuations, eventually the market will pick itself back up. And the Toronto market and Greater Toronto area is a very strong real estate market. So I always encourage my clients to continue investing, not for my own selfish purposes, of course, but of course I do always encourage them, because I say to them, when the equity grows in your property and you've seen it, and there's no way in my personal view that I can ever see money grow that quickly, in a regular savings account. I mean, when you see the equity increase in your property, and you can then possibly take out that money and reinvest that and put that into an investment property. I mean, that is the beauty of real estate. So I always encourage my clients to just hold on, wait and see what happens. If you're, being cautious at the moment, whether to sell, whether to buy, then just wait a little bit. But don't be afraid to ever jump into the real estate market, because you'll always kick yourself and say, I wish I invested at this age. I wish I, sold at that age. I wish I did this. never a wrong time, I believe, to buy real estate or sell real estate, to be quite honest.
Well, that's a good positive recommendation. So thank you for that. Sarita, appreciate all of your comments based on your experience. If people want to contact you to hire you or to just bounce some ideas off of you, how do they contact you from a legal standpoint?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to discuss real estate matters. It's 647-748-1377 is our phone number. And our website is sstlaw.ca. And we're located
sstlaw.ca.
sstlaw.ca. And we're located in Etobicoke.
Excellent. Sarita, Samaroo, I really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much for educating us on the real estate market in a time of COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Brian, for having me.
Thank you. So what do you think is actually going to happen?
So I think what's going to happen is that we're going to see a lot more sales rather than purchases. And I think people are just definitely a little bit more fearful in purchasing property. But I think, again, as I mentioned before, like it's a wait and see game, and not to worry that, eventually real estate always picks itself up and the market stabilizes. So that's what we're going to see.
So, I'm worried. I'm worried that the market's going to come down. People, small businesses, restaurants are going to go bankrupt. People have been laid off. People have been furloughed. Unemployment is at 13% higher than it was in the Great Depression. Before this all happened, some people were saying that the Toronto real estate market was overpriced. Why don't you think it's going to come down?
It'll come down a little bit, but then the market always seems to correct itself because, COVID-19 is not here to stay, essentially. That's my personal view. It's not going to be here for forever. And so, and the Toronto market in particular, and even just outside of Toronto, in the GTA, there's always demand for property because we have such an influx of immigrants coming into the city, coming into Toronto. And so
okay. Are immigrants coming in now? With COVID-19 restrictions, aren't immigrants restricted from coming in?
They are restricted, but they're the ones that were already present with work permits and are here. They're buying property, and surprisingly, this 15% non-resident speculation taxes seems to not be deterring them because they do need a place to live. And that's what it comes down to with housing. Everyone needs somewhere to live. So, and eventually people do get sick of renting and being tenants. And if they can save up enough funds for the down payment and are able to purchase property, they're going to invest. So I really don't see how the real estate market is going to slow down all that much. I think it will slow down slightly and has slowed down slightly, but it's not going to be permanent.
What about downtown condos versus single family dwellings? I would have thought that a lot of people that were stuck downtown in a condo without a balcony, or maybe with a very small balcony, and going up and down an elevator with people that they didn't know and weren't wearing masks and worried about touching an elevator, are going to be reticent to living in condos in the future, and they're going to want to move out to the burbs and back into a single family home.
It's not affordable. That's the thing. I mean, even though there's been a slight drop in prices, homes are still not affordable. I mean, the average selling price roughly in Toronto is close to $900,000 for a single family dwelling, and just outside the GTA it's close to around $750,000. That's not always an attainable goal for people. Like, they can't all afford property, and condos, especially new construction properties, are a lot more affordable, especially in the city. And condos are easier in terms of maintenance. You don't have a yard to maintain. You don't have the overhead in terms of hydro, water. So you just have one maintenance fee you take care of monthly, and you do have a place to hang your hat and essentially somewhere to sleep at night, and it's not as costly initially to invest. So you are looking at, let's say, payments that are staggered over 3 years for a new construction property, a new construction condo, and you have time to save for that, to put money down. And by the time you've hit the end of 3 years, you may have put down already 30% of the purchase price, 20% of the purchase price. So, and that property has already gone up in value for you in those 3 years. So it's worth it to invest in condos. It's worth it to invest in Toronto. I mean, the infrastructure is there, the schools are there, the jobs are here. So why?
But everyone's working from home, and it's working out reasonably well, and they're all doing everything by Zoom like we are right now, or FaceTime, or Microsoft something or other. And you don't think that the desire to live close to downtown office buildings is going to go down?
Not at all. No. I mean, people need a place to live, and really just there aren't enough places to live in Toronto. It's surprising. And even in just outside of Toronto, there really isn't enough supply. So that being said, our real estate market, in my view, will always be strong. And it's always great to invest in, especially in Toronto, just right outside of Toronto. And so, yes, we'll see a correction and an adjustment as a result of COVID-19. People have been laid off, lost their jobs, unfortunately, and there is some effects of that. People may have to sell, but we'll see a lot of sales, and we'll see a lot of investors swooping in that do have the funds available and buying those properties at a essentially a discounted price, because those properties will go up again in value. So,
is the choice of a lawyer that's going to represent you in a real estate transaction that important? Because most of the work's done by the real estate agent or broker, isn't it? How important is?
Oh yes, we don't talk about values. I mean, I'm giving my own personal opinion as to values and what I'm seeing in terms of the real estate market. And again, I'm not a realtor, don't claim to be. However, no, we facilitate the transaction. We're at the end, again, verifying IDs, being a representative for the lender, acting on behalf of the lender in the transaction as well as the client. We can act for both parties in the transaction and close your deal. We're doing the conveyancing work, essentially, the title searches. But no, in terms of market value, you would ask your realtor. This is where they would come in and just recommend to you what areas will have maintained their value. I mean, I've been told by certain realtors there's still some bidding wars on properties, if you can believe that.
But it sounds to me like having someone as knowledgeable as you and as articulate that can make sure that your clients are aware of the risks and issues, access to different mortgage brokers and different sources of capital if they end up having a hiccup in getting their financing, is probably pretty critically important.
No, it is. It's certainly, I think, having knowledge of the real estate market and not just being a facilitator of the transaction is important, because, like I said, I actually love reading about real estate trends and the market and understanding it and understanding how financing works beyond just facilitating the deal for my clients. So yes, I do give a different perspective. And I always encourage my clients to continue to invest in real estate. I mean, they come back with smiling ear to ear. I see them 5 years later and they've made so much money on their properties, even when there's been a bit of a dip in the market. The market seems to always correct itself. And so they seem to be quite satisfied with their purchase and what they had done. And they come back and say, Sarita, you were right. I'm glad we ended up going through with this deal in the end. I'm glad we invested, because now look at this, I'm selling this for $300,000 more. So, there's beauty in real estate in that. If you just sometimes weather the storm and wait until, sometimes these harsh market conditions happen, and eventually it will correct itself. And I think we get a lot of that advice from our banks too, when it comes to RSPs and our own investments, but real estate, I think, is a little bit better in the sense that, your money seems to be safe and sound in real estate, especially in Toronto and the greater Toronto area. So,
well, you heard it here. There's beauty in real estate, and you just got to weather the storm and wait it out. And you're going to be very happy, smiling from ear to ear. Thank you, Sarita.
My pleasure.